She sewed every wound herself for 30 years without sound. A Lakota chief sewed the last one. The needle was bone. That's the first thing I noticed about it, even before I noticed her hands. The needle was carved from bone, probably deer, and it had been used so many times the eye of it was worn smooth as river stone. She kept it in a small leather pouch that hung from her belt, and when she reached for it I pulled back without meaning to. Just reflex. 30 years of reflex. She didn't say anything, just waited. Winona always waited. I want to tell you something about pain before I tell you the rest of this. Not the big pain, the kind that makes you bite down on leather and see colors at the edges of your sight. I mean the other kind. The kind that settles in so long it stops having a name. It becomes your posture. It becomes the way you hold your shoulders when a man rides up fast, or the way your hand goes to your knife before your mind does. Pain that old isn't pain anymore. It's just who you are. I had carried that kind of pain for a long time, longer than I could account for honestly. It had started, I think, the first winter I was chief. I was 31, and 2 of our young men had been killed in a raid that I had not anticipated and probably could have, if I had been paying closer attention. I did not sleep well for the better part of a year after that. Then I learned to sleep again. Then I learned to carry the not sleeping inside the sleeping, which sounds impossible but is not, if you practice long enough. You practice it because you have to. Because the band needs you to be the man who holds things together, and the man who holds things together cannot be seen coming apart. There are 100 small ways you learn to compact the grief, to press it smaller and smaller until it fits somewhere you don't have to look at. I am not saying this is good. I am saying this is what happens. And after enough years of it, you stop knowing the difference between the compact grief and the plain, ordinary you. And that is its own kind of problem, one that takes longer to see clearly. The wound in my left side had been there 3 weeks, by the time Winona came to sit across from me that September evening. A blade below the rib not deep enough to kill, the kind of wound a man survives without a fuss and then sometimes doesn't, depending on what he does in the weeks after. I had been doing everything wrong. Moving when I should have rested, working when I should have been still, closing the thing myself in the field with whatever came to hand. Horsehair twice, once just pressure and cloth. The wound kept reopening. Not dramatically, not gushing, nothing theatrical about it. It would seal by morning, crack open by afternoon when I was moving through the camp, and the muscle would catch the wrong way. I had been aware of the blood for 3 weeks, and had been managing my awareness of it the same way I managed everything, by compressing it small and putting it somewhere I didn't need to look. Winona had seen it. Of course she had. She saw everything that moved through that camp, the way a hawk sees, not by hunting any single thing but by holding the whole sky at once. She was our medicine woman, had been for 20 years, but it wasn't only the title that gave her that quality of seeing. She had it before the title. She had been born with that particular kind of attention, the kind that registers what is actually happening rather than what should be happening. She had offered twice before this night. The first time I thanked her and said it was nearly healed. The second time I said nothing, just walked away. Not rudely, or maybe rudely, I don't know. I was not trying to be rude. I was trying to keep something intact that I hadn't fully named yet, which I now understand was the belief that needing anything from anyone was a kind of failure I couldn't afford. That's the part I have to explain, and I don't know if I can explain it right. When you lead people for a long time, not lead them the way a general leads soldiers, but lead them the way a man leads people who are also his family, who are also his responsibility, who are also his grief when they die, you stop being the kind of person who accepts help. It happens slowly. First you stop asking, then you stop acknowledging the need. Then one day you realize the thought of someone's hands on a wound of yours feels like something close to shame. And you don't know exactly when that happened or how to find your way back to the man you were before it did. My father was not a man who showed his injuries. My grandfather was not either. I don't think this is wisdom. I'm not sure it was ever wisdom, but it was the only inheritance I knew how to carry, and I had been carrying it for 30 years, through every raid and every loss and every winter that took someone I wasn't fast enough or strong enough or wise enough to protect. The shape of a man who does not need tending. I had worn it so long it had become the shape of me. I should tell you how I knew Winona before that September evening, because the knowing matters. She had come to this band when she was perhaps 26 or 27, already a trained medicine woman, already competent beyond her years in the way some people are competent, as if they were born a decade ahead of their body. Her mother had sent her with a recommendation to our elder at the time, a man named Standing Elk who had been dying slowly of the kind of pain that lives in the joints and won't leave. Winona could not cure him. She was honest about that at the outset, which was the first thing I respected about her. She did not promise what she couldn't deliver. What she could do was manage the pain so that his last 2 years were not entirely consumed by it, and she did that. He died with his mind clear, which was what he had wanted, and the band kept her after. In those early years she had been more brittle than she is now. Not unkind, not ever that, but with a kind of sharpness in her assessments that could catch people off guard. She was not patient with foolishness, which in medicine is a reasonable position to hold. But she had not yet learned to separate the person from the foolishness, and sometimes what looked like foolishness from the outside was only fear, and fear is a different problem than stupidity. I had spoken to her about this once, very early on. I don't remember exactly what prompted it, some situation in the camp where she had been, I thought, harder than the moment required. We had not yet settled into the easy orbit we would develop over years. I did not know her well enough to say what I was thinking without thinking first about how to say it. I chose the wrong way to say it, probably. She received what I said with a stillness that I could not read, and then she went away, and for 2 weeks she was colder toward me than before, and I thought I had made an enemy. Then one evening she appeared at my fire and sat down and said, without preamble, "You were right." I did not ask what she meant, because I knew what she meant. "My mother was always right," she said. "I have spent many years being right. It is not always the most useful thing." I said, "It is useful. It is just not always sufficient." She looked at me for a moment. "Yes," she said. "That is a better way to say it." And after that we were something different to each other. Not friends exactly, not yet. We were too different and too careful for friendship to come quickly. But we were people who had been honest with each other once, and honesty between people creates a space that is different from the space that was there before. Over the years, the band provided 100 occasions for us to be honest with each other. A sickness that moved through the camp the second winter she was with us, taking 3 elders and 2 children, and the council meeting after in which people needed someone to blame and looked for it in the direction of the medicine woman. I stood in that meeting and said clearly what I thought of blame as a response to death, which is that it is a thing people reach for because grief is unbearable and blame is a place for the grief to go. Winona was in the back of that meeting, and she did not look at me then. But the day after she came to my fire with smoked meat and sat down and didn't say anything, which was her way of saying something. There was a winter, the one people now call the Black Winter, though at the time we just called it this winter, the way you always call the worst winter just this winter, when 3 families had to be taken in from another band, refugees from a situation none of them had survived with everything intact. We were stretched tight. Food was a careful calculation. Winona managed the medicine side of that with a precision that I could not have equaled, who could afford to get sick and who could not, what the available supplies were and how to make them last, where we were most vulnerable and what we could do about it. She reported to me every 3 days and the reports were models of clarity. I told her so. She said, "Tell me when I am wrong. The reports are only good if you tell me when I am wrong." I never had to. She was not wrong that winter. Afterward there was the kind of exhausted gratitude between us that sometimes forms between people who have been through something difficult together. A closeness that doesn't require explanation, because the explanation is the shared experience. We didn't speak about it directly, but something shifted. We stood nearer to each other after that, not in any way that the band would have noticed or remarked on, just nearer. And for 9 years since her husband died, we had stood at that distance, near enough for honesty, near enough for something that wasn't named, not near enough for anything else. I don't know if either of us chose that distance or if it simply settled that way, the way water settles at the level it finds. I had not thought about choosing or not choosing. I had not thought about it much at all. There was too much to do. The third time Winona offered, she didn't offer. She came to where I was sitting outside my lodge near the end of the day. The sky going that particular orange it goes in September when the air is already cold, but the light is still fighting to stay. I had my back against a post and I was very still, which probably told her what she needed to know, because a man who is very still when he is usually moving is a man trying not to let the pain show on his face. I was concentrating on each breath, not because breathing was hard, but because it was the one thing I could control absolutely, and I needed something to control. She sat down across from me, not beside me, across. She set her medicine bag between us, which was a practical thing to do, and she said, "I am going to look at it." Not asking, not offering, just a statement of what was about to happen. I said, "It's fine." She looked at me the way she looked at things she was about to do anyway. Level. Not unkind, but not interested in argument either. There was something in that look, something I recognized without being able to name it, that reminded me of the way very experienced craftspeople look at a problem. Not judgment, just the specific attention of someone who knows what something costs and is prepared to pay it. "You've been gray around the mouth for 4 days, she said. I hadn't known she was watching that closely. I should have known. I had known Winona for most of my adult life. She had come to this band when she was a young woman, already trained by her mother in medicine, already carrying a seriousness that most people mistook for coldness. It wasn't coldness. I knew that even then, though it took me some time to understand exactly what it was. She grieved deeply, that was one thing. But more than that, she was one of those people who cannot be in the world without being genuinely in it. She could not half attend to something. When she tended the sick, she was entirely there. When she sat with the grieving, she was entirely there. When she was alone, she was entirely alone. I think people who are like that exhaust themselves in ways other people don't understand because they cannot take a partial rest. They are either fully present or they are not there at all. She had lost her husband 9 years ago. A good man, quiet, who grew the best corn in the camp and told stories to children at night that made them go quiet and thoughtful instead of just sleepy. He had been sick for 3 months and Winona had tended him with everything she knew, which was considerable, and it had not been enough. I had sat with her for 2 days after. Neither of us talked much. I brought wood and kept the fire and she sat with her grief, and I did not try to move her through it faster than it wanted to go. That was the only useful thing I knew how to do. After that we had been something to each other that I never exactly named. Closer than neighbors, not the same as family. She consulted me on things the band needed to know. I sometimes stood near her fire and we talked about nothing much, the kind of talk that isn't about the words at all, but about the fact of 2 people willing to stand near each other in the dark. I had never let her touch a wound. "Take your shirt off," she said. "Winona, you are not going to die from this wound," she said, "but you are going to stop healing from it if it opens one more time. I have watched you take 3 steps and flinch for the last week." She paused. "You are the man this band looks to. If they see you flinch, they are afraid, so this is not only about you." That was a precise thing to say to me. She knew it would work and she said it anyway, which was either unkind or simply honest, and with Winona I had learned over many years to assume honesty. I took my shirt off. The wound was not pretty. I knew that before she looked at it, but seeing her face go still and careful confirmed it. It had opened again sometime in the last day, and what had partially closed had partially not, and there was heat in the skin around it that I had been choosing not to think about. 3 weeks of this. 3 weeks of pretending I was managing something that was not being managed. She did not make a sound. She examined it with her fingers, light but thorough, moving across the skin around the wound with the tips of her fingers pressed flat, checking for things I didn't know how to name. I felt the pressure of her touch the way you feel rain, aware of it, registering it, but not entirely inside the sensation. "You have been cleaning it," she said. "Yes." "With what?" "Water from the creek above the camp, clean water." "Good." She reached into her bag. "That is the only thing that kept this from being much worse." She worked without talking for a while. She cleaned it again, more thoroughly than I had been doing, with something she had prepared that smelled like yarrow and something else I didn't recognize, a resinous smell, sharp and clear. It stung in a way that was clarifying, almost a relief, because pain with a clear source and purpose is different from the low, formless kind. This was pain that meant something was happening. I could organize around this kind. Then she threaded the bone needle with sinew. I watched her hands. I don't know why I tell you this except that it mattered. Her hands were not young hands. They had lines at the knuckles, and the skin over them was thin the way skin gets after decades of work and weather. She had very precise hands, though. All her movements were like that, precise, economical, no gesture wasted. I had watched her for 23 years, and I had never seen her make an unnecessary movement. It was one of the things about her that had always struck me without my knowing quite why. She said, "This will hurt." "I know." "Tell me something," she said. Not a question exactly, a direction. "What?" "Anything. It will help you stay still." I didn't have anything ready, so I said the first thing that came into my head, which was about the winter of my 12th year, when my father took me out onto the plains for 3 days with nothing but a knife, and told me to come back ready to be a man. I hadn't thought about that in years. I don't know why I thought about it then, except perhaps because I was sitting very exposed under cold sky with someone working on me, and my body had found the memory of another time I was cold and uncertain, and trying to be more capable than I felt. The cold that winter had a particular quality. It came in sideways from the northwest, and it had teeth in it that a cold from the south doesn't have. I told her about building a shelter from brush and sage, how I'd done it wrong the first time and had to start over with my fingers already going stiff. I told her about lying inside it the first night, listening to everything outside. How twice in the night I had heard something large moving past me in the dark and not known what it was. How I had the knife in my hand the whole night and never slept deeply. How in the morning I found tracks that were deer, just deer, and had felt both relieved and foolish. She listened and she worked, and the needle went in and out, and I talked. My father came on the second day, I told her, not to help, to check. He stood at the edge of my camp and looked at what I'd made, and he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, in his way that was mostly silence with a few words inside it, "The second shelter is better than the first one would have been." And then he left. That was it. That was the praise. I told her I had carried those words for 50 years, and I still didn't know entirely what to do with them. She tied off the thread and cut it close. Then she pressed a poultice against the stitching that was cool and smelled like something green and clean, and she held it there with one hand. "Keep still for a moment," she said. I kept still. The sun had gone behind the western hills and the orange was fading to gray-pink. Someone's fire was starting up to the east and I could smell it, cottonwood smoke, which has a particular smell, sweeter than oak, less sharp than pine. Somewhere a horse was moving in the dark at the edge of camp, the soft sound of hooves in dry grass. She was still sitting close to tend the poultice, and when she had finished pressing it, she did not immediately move back. Her hands were in her lap. I could feel the warmth of her being near in the way you feel a fire, not any single point of heat, but a general warmth occupying the space between you. I said, "Thank you." She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Why do you never let anyone do this for you?" It wasn't a criticism. She asked it the way she asked everything, as if she genuinely wanted to know, as if the answer mattered to her not abstractly but practically, as if she was going to do something with the information. I thought about it. I got used to being the one who holds things together, I said finally. I think somewhere in that I started believing I wasn't allowed to need holding. She was quiet for a moment. The fire to the east was getting established, catching the larger wood now and starting to speak in longer flames. "That is a very foolish thing to believe," she said. I almost laughed, almost. "I know," I said. "You have held this band together through 5 hard winters," she said. "Through raids and sickness and drought. I have watched you take in grief that would have broken most men and walk the next morning as if you were carrying nothing." She paused. "But I have seen the weight of it, every time." I didn't say anything. "I am not telling you this to make you feel weak," she said. "I am telling you because you have spent 30 years believing that being strong means needing nothing. And I think you are wrong." The cold was coming up properly now, out of the ground as it does after sunset, different from the cold that comes from the sky. This cold had a heavier quality, settling around your ankles first and working up. "My husband," she said, and then she stopped. I waited. I knew how to wait for her. She didn't rush things and I had learned not to rush her. "My husband used to let me fuss over him," she said. "Every small thing, a splinter, a scrape, a sore heel from the trail. He would come and sit by me and hold out whatever needed tending and look at me while I worked. And I don't think it was really about the injury." She paused. "I think he just liked being near me while I did the thing I was good at. And I liked it too." She wasn't looking at me when she said this. She was looking at the poultice, at her own hands. "I have not had anyone to tend to in 9 years," she said. "I have tended the sick and the wounded and the children of this band. But that is different. That is duty." She stopped again. "I am talking about something else. I don't know the right word for it." I knew the word she meant. I didn't say it either. We sat there in the cold that was coming up from the ground, and the dark settling in from the east. Then she said, "If you will let me, I would like to look at this again in 3 days." And something in the way she said it, not a medical offer, not exactly, or not only, something in it opened a door I had kept shut for a long time, not pushed it open. Just made it clear the door was there, and that she knew about it, and that she wasn't asking me to walk through it right then, only to know it existed. "All right," I said. That was all. She took her bag and went to her lodge, and I sat there another long while in the gathering dark with my shirt still off and the cold on my arms and the poultice on my side, and something strange happening in my chest that took me most of the night to recognize. I want to tell you what those 3 days were like, because they were not 3 days of nothing. The first day I noticed things I had stopped noticing. The way she moved through the camp, not hurried, not slow, always purposeful. She had a particular way of walking that covered ground without appearing to be in a hurry, which I had seen before without registering it. I registered it now. The way children came to her without being called when they were hurt or scared, as if she put out some quality of attention they could feel from a distance. The way she stood when she was thinking, very still, her weight settled, like a tree that has stopped worrying about the wind. I had seen all of it before. I was seeing it differently. There was a thing that happened late in the first afternoon that I have thought about since. One of the women in the band, a young woman, newly married, anxious about everything in the way new mothers are, came to Winona worried about her infant son, who had been fussy. The child was not sick. Anyone could see it was not sick. It was simply a child being a child, colicky, difficult, entirely normal. But the mother was frightened. Winona spent an hour with them, not treating anything, just sitting with the mother while the child settled and talking. I couldn't hear what she said from where I was, but I could see the mother's face, the way it changed. When the young woman left, she was still tired, but she was not frightened anymore. When Winona had been a young woman, newly trained, she had been impatient with hypochondria. I remembered that about her. I remembered thinking she was too quick to dismiss what she considered unfounded worry. Somewhere in 20 years of practice, she had learned that the fear itself is sometimes the thing that needs tending, and that a person who is afraid needs to be sat with more than they need to be corrected. I thought about that a long time, about what it costs a person to learn that. The second day, one of the young men in the band, a boy of 17 who thought very well of his own courage, which at 17 is almost universal, came to me angry about something. A slight, real or imagined, from a man in another band who had passed through. He wanted to ride after him. He wanted blood, or what passes for blood in the imagination of a 17-year-old who has not yet seen enough of the thing to know what it costs. I talked him out of it. Not with commands, that never works, or it works only until the moment you turn your back. I talked with him for a long time about what anger costs and what pride costs, and what the difference is between the kind of respect you earn through patience and the kind you think you're claiming through violence, but are actually only borrowing at very high interest. It was a long conversation. He pushed back. He had good arguments. I let him make them. By the end, he was not satisfied, but he was calmer. And there is more value in calm than in satisfied when you're 17 and your blood is up. When I turned around from that conversation, Winona was standing maybe 15 feet away. Not eavesdropping. She had probably been walking past when the thing started and had stopped so as not to interrupt. She had heard it, or some of it, and the look on her face was not pity or admiration or any of those things that would have embarrassed me. It was just acknowledgement. The look of a person who sees another person doing the thing they were made to do and recognizes it without needing to name it. She went on her way without saying anything. That meant more to me than if she'd made it into something. The third day she came at evening again, same as before. The wound was closing properly now. She checked it with the same precise hands, said one word, "good," but the way she said it contained several things, and replaced the poultice with a lighter one. I watched her work and I thought about the bone needle worn smooth at the eye from decades of use, and about all the wounds it had closed, and about the fact that she had always given this to other people and never, that I had seen, let anyone give it back. When she finished, she did not immediately move to stand. The dark came on faster than it had 3 days ago. We were moving into October and the evenings were short now, the light leaving before you were ready for it. The fire across the way was already lit. I could hear the band settling into the rhythms of night, voices dropping, children being brought inside. I said, "You were married to a good man." She said, "Yes." "Do you miss having someone to sit with?" The silence was longer than usual. "Yes," she said. "I have been alone a long time," I said. My wife had died young, very young, when our daughter was born. The daughter had grown and married well and lived 2 days' ride east, and I visited when I could, and her children called me grandfather, and I loved them with a precise and separate love that was different from the daily, ordinary love I felt for the people of this band. I had been alone in the specific way you're alone when everyone around you needs something from you and there is no one who simply wants to be with you. I had forgotten, I said, what it felt like to have someone near who wanted to sit with me instead of wanting something from me. She looked at me for a moment. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I know. Except perhaps," she said, with something almost like lightness at the edge of her voice, "for you to stop closing your own wounds with horsehair." I said, "I will try." She almost smiled. It reached her eyes, not a full smile, something more careful than that, but real. Then she said a thing that I have thought about many times since. "I have known you for 23 years, she said. "I knew you as a young man, and I have watched you become what you are. You are not what this camp made you. You were already something when you came to it. You would have been something regardless of any of this." She paused and looked at the fire for a moment. "I want you to know that I see you as a man, not only as what you hold together." I had not known I needed to hear that. I would have told you before that moment that I had long since stopped needing to be seen by anyone. I would have believed it. And then she said that, and I understood that I had needed to hear it for a long time, possibly for most of my life, that somewhere under all the years of being the one who holds things, there was still a man who needed someone to know he was there. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. She put her hand on my arm briefly, the kind of touch that isn't asking for anything, only saying, "I am here, I know, you don't have to speak." Then she stood. But she didn't leave. She stood there and she looked out at the camp, at the fires and the movement and the life of the people we had both spent ourselves on for decades, and I looked at her standing there with the firelight on the side of her face, and I thought, this woman has given everything she had for 30 years and never once asked anyone to see it. And for a reason I couldn't entirely explain to myself, that was the thing that undid me most. "Winona," I said. She turned. "Sit with me a while." She looked at me a moment, not surprised, not uncertain, checking, I think, that I meant what I said. Then she sat back down, not across from me this time, beside me. We didn't talk much. The fire across the way settled into its long evening burn. One of the dogs came and lay down near us, the way dogs do when everything is calm. The cold was serious now, and without deciding to, I moved slightly to provide a windbreak, and she shifted slightly toward me, and neither of us said anything about any of it. I want to tell you what the weeks after were like, because it was not a simple thing, the way things are sometimes not simple. We were both old enough to have opinions about everything. She thought I was too patient with the young men when they pushed past what was reasonable. I thought she was sometimes too quick to give the final judgment on a thing when the thing still needed time to find its own level. She thought I held counsels too long. I did hold them too long, I knew it. There had been nights when I talked when I should have listened and nights when I listened when I should have talked, and counsels were the place where both of those sins compounded. I thought she occasionally failed to ask for help when she needed it. She said the same thing about me, and did not feel this was a contradiction. We argued about the right way to prepare dried meat for a long winter journey, which seems like a small thing but which we argued about with genuine energy on a cold night in late October while she was cooking, and I was supposed to be doing something else. We argued about it for a good half hour. I think we were both right, depending on the length of the journey and the condition of the horses. She told me about her childhood, born 2 days' ride east, the daughter of a medicine woman who had been a severe and exacting teacher and had also, Winona said, been the person she loved most in the world. Her mother had not praised work that was merely good. She expected work that was right, and she could tell the difference. And when Winona did something right, she would look at her with a particular look that wasn't quite a smile but contained more than a smile. Winona had spent her whole life, she said, trying to earn that look from someone. She said this without self-pity, just as information. I told her about my father's silences, the ones I had spent most of my adult life trying to understand, the way he could be in a room and be entirely absent from it, the way he could also, rarely, look at you with a quality of attention that made you feel that you were the only thing in the world worth looking at, and how that quality, because it was rare, because it had to be earned in ways you couldn't always predict, had shaped everything about how I understood worthiness and whether I had it. I had been making peace with this for years. I was still making peace with it. Some inheritances take a long time to reckon. She listened to this without advice, which was the right response. Then she said, "He would have been proud of what you are." She said it plainly, not as a comfort but as an assessment. I believed her because she did not say things she didn't believe. There was a night in November, already deep in the cold, when a child in the camp was sick with something fast and serious. A boy of 4, the son of one of the younger couples, and he had gone from feverish to burning in a matter of hours, and the burning would not come down. Winona did not sleep for 2 days. I sat near her during those 2 days, not in her way, not asking anything, just present. She would work for a long time in silence, and then she would stop and be still in a way that I recognized as a person listening to something very deep in themselves, checking whether they had missed anything, whether there was one more thing they knew that they hadn't tried yet. She said once, at the beginning of the second day when she was very tired and the child was still very bad, "Talk to me. Anything. Keep me from going somewhere dark in my head." So I talked, the same way I had talked when she was stitching me, not because the words mattered, but because she needed something to hold to that was not the space inside her own fear. I talked about everything I could bring up. The summer I was young, and a thunderstorm had come through the valley for 3 straight days. What the light was like between the lightning, a particular quality, green and liquid, that I had only ever seen in the middle of a serious storm. I talked about the creek that ran behind this camp and how it changed sound in different seasons, what it said in the spring thaw versus the low, flat murmur of late summer when the water was low and slow. I talked about a horse I had loved as a young man, a bay mare who knew where I was going before I told her, who had a way of turning her head to look at me in the morning that had felt like being asked a question. I kept talking until the night opened up into gray dawn, and Winona's hands kept working, and sometime before full light the child's breathing changed, settled, deepened, the burning body finding its way back from wherever it had been going. Winona closed her eyes for a long moment, not praying or not only, receiving something. She let me take her to her lodge after that. She was past the place where pride operates. She let me guide her by the arm through the cold morning air, and she sat down on her sleeping robes, and she was barely able to keep her eyes open. I pulled the robes up around her, and she said, very quietly, almost not saying it, the way you say something when the guard is entirely down, and you have forgotten to manage how it sounds. "Don't go." I sat outside her lodge and kept the fire. She slept for 11 hours. When she came out, her eyes were clear and she had her hair arranged and she looked like herself, the composed, precise, self-contained self she presented to the world. She looked at me once with an expression I cannot describe exactly. It was the expression of a woman who has been seen in the worst of herself, the most exhausted and frightened and undone place, and not found wanting. She did not say thank you. Neither of us said much. She took the pot from the fire and made something for us to eat, and we ate together in the early afternoon quiet, and after a while she looked at me again with that expression. There was a council in late November that I want to tell you about, because it sits beside the rest of this in a way that matters. We were deciding about the winter camp, whether to stay in the valley where we were or move to a more sheltered position, 2 days to the northwest, that we had used before. Arguments both ways, reasonable people on both sides, and the council going long into the cold night the way councils do when no one is wrong and no one wants to be the first to admit uncertainty. I had been holding the thing together for 3 hours, and I was tired, and my side had not bothered me in a week. And yet at that moment it bothered me, a dull awareness, not pain exactly, just the body noting that it was tired. I made the call to stay in the valley. It was the right call for the right reasons, but the reasons took 30 minutes to lay out properly, and at the end of it the fire was very low, and most of the council looked like they had been up a long time. Winona was not on the council. She was not a council member. She was the medicine woman, and these were 2 different things. But she was present at the edge of that fire, the way she sometimes was at councils when she thought the health of the band might be relevant to whatever was being decided. She had not spoken. When the council broke and people began to drift toward their lodges, she lingered. I was banking the fire, which is a thing I do partly because it needs doing, and partly because it gives me something to do with my hands while I come down from the particular alertness of a long council. She waited until the others were gone. Then she said, "You have not eaten since this morning." I turned to look at her. "You ate this morning," she said, "and not since." I noticed. I said I was busy. Yes, she said, you are always busy. She held something out, a piece of dried meat wrapped in cloth, warm from being carried inside her blanket. Eat this. I took it. I ate it. She watched me eat it with the same level of attention she brought to everything, which under other circumstances might have been disconcerting, but by now I understood it was just how she looked at things she cared about. The decision was right, she said. I know. I wanted to say it, she said, because you will be awake tonight going over it. I wanted you to have something to hold when you do. I looked at her. She looked back, matter of fact, as if this were a perfectly ordinary thing to say to a person, to name what they were going to be doing in the dark and offer them something for it. How did you know I would be awake? I said. Because you always are, she said. After a council like this one, when the right answer was not obvious, you will be awake until you have turned it over enough times to be sure. She paused. I have known you for 23 years. I know what you do. There is something particular about being known that well. Not known in the sense of having your history or your biography, known in the sense of someone tracking the small recurring patterns of how you live. The kind of knowing that only comes from sustained attention over a long time. It is one thing when the attention is incidental. It is another when it is deliberate. She went to her lodge. I went to mine, and I was awake until well past midnight, as she had said I would be, turning the council over and checking its conclusions against the small, still voice in me that is the closest thing I have to certainty. And somewhere in the middle of that long, dark accounting, I found myself holding the piece of cloth that the dried meat had been wrapped in, which she had made warm for me, and I held it for a while without thinking about anything in particular. There was a morning about a week after the child recovered, the camp still in the first real cold of November, when I went to bring wood to her lodge before she was up. Not a large thing, just wood. I had a surplus and she had been busy, and I knew that when she ran short she would go cut it herself rather than ask anyone, because that was how she was. I left it stacked neatly by the entrance and went away before she came out. That afternoon she came to find me at the edge of the camp, where I was looking at the horses. She stood beside me and looked at the horses too for a while without saying anything. Then she said, "You brought wood." "Yes." "You didn't have to." "I know." She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "When my husband brought wood without being asked, I used to pretend I hadn't noticed so he wouldn't feel obligated to stop." I understood what she was saying. "Then I will also pretend," I said, "if that makes it easier to keep happening." She made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but its near neighbor. Then she went back to the camp and I stayed and looked at the horses for a while, and the cold was very clean in my lungs, and somewhere behind my ribs something was moving that had been still for a very long time. I want to tell you now about something that happened in December, because it is the thing this whole account has been building toward without my knowing it. It was the serious cold by then, the kind that makes the air hard and bright, the kind where everything is very clear and very still because even the wind has decided it is too cold for movement. I had been up since before light to deal with something at the eastern edge of the camp, nothing dramatic, just the kind of small, persistent problem that a camp produces the way a fire produces ash, and that needs attending to before it becomes large. When I came back, it was just coming on to full dawn. There was smoke coming from Winona's lodge, which meant she was up earlier than usual. I went to my own lodge. I sat down. My side did not hurt. This was a recent development, perhaps the last week, and I noticed it the way you notice the absence of a sound that has been going on so long you stopped hearing it. The absence was louder than the presence had been. 20 minutes later she appeared at the entrance to my lodge with a bowl of something hot, steam coming off it in the cold air. She set it in my hands without explanation. Then she sat down across from me. She had made it herself. This was clear, made it before I was up, before I had come back from the eastern edge of camp, which meant she had been up long enough to make it and had chosen to make it. For me. I held the bowl in both hands and the warmth of it went into my palms and then all the way through me. At that temperature, that kind of warmth is not nothing. That kind of warmth is the specific warmth of someone thinking about you when you're not there. I ate and the warmth settled deep, and the morning was blue-white and very still outside. After a while she said, "The wound has healed well." "Yes." "You should have let me see it sooner." "Yes." She waited a moment and then said, "You should always let someone see it sooner." I looked at her. She was looking back at me with no particular expression, or rather, with the expression she had that I had finally found a word for. Not the professional attention she brought to the sick, not the composed face she wore for the band. Something behind both of those. The look of a woman who has decided to stop standing at a distance from something, who has walked up to it and is now here, and is not planning to go anywhere. I said, "I know." She said, "I know you know." Then quietly, "I am glad you let me." The cold sat around us, and the camp began to stir, small sounds filtering in. A fire being built nearby. Two women talking in low voices about something ordinary. The sound of a horse shifting at the end of its tie. I thought about the bone needle worn smooth at the eye. About all the things she had tended that had not been tended back. About the 23 years between two people who had seen each other clearly and never said so. I thought about my father's silences, and about what it costs a man to believe that needing anything is a failure, and about all the years I had spent compressing the grief smaller and smaller, until I had started to think the compressed thing was my whole self. I was not young. I was not going to be young again. The body was full of opinions, the cold in the joints in the morning, the various small accountings of a life lived hard outdoors, the side that had healed but would always know the weather now. None of that was going to change. A man my age carries everything he has done in the way a stone carries everything that has happened to it. You can read the weather in the cracks, the history in the shape. I want to tell you something about what it is to be a man of 54 who has spent 30 years being whatever everyone around him needed him to be, and who has done this willingly, not as martyrdom, not as performance, but because it was true, because he was actually the best person for the holding together and he knew it, and the knowing did not make it lighter but it made it honest. The work was real. The weight was real. The cost was real. And I had paid it without much considering what was left after the payment, which is a thing a man can do for 30 years before he understands that what is left after is also himself. What Winona had done, and I don't think she planned it, I don't think she came to me that September evening with a design. What she had done was find the man that was left after the payment and sit down next to him. Not the chief, not the holder together, not the person the band looked to when the sky went dark. Just the man, the one who told a story about his 12th winter to stay still while she worked, the one who was awake after councils going over the decisions. The one who brought wood so she wouldn't have to. The one who had needed someone beside him in the cold for longer than he had known how to say. But I was sitting there with a bowl of something warm that a woman had made for me before I was awake, and the warmth of it was in my hands and all the way down into my chest, and across from me was a woman who had watched me for 23 years and had decided I was worth watching, who had seen me in the places I keep hidden. The pride that keeps me from asking, the grief that has no name, the man under all the holding together, and had not looked away. She reached over and took the empty bowl from my hands when I had finished. I let her. Outside, the camp was waking up fully now. I could hear everything that belonged to morning, the ordinary sounds of people going about living, which is the best sound there is when you have spent enough years unsure whether the morning would bring it. The cold made everything sharp and clear. The smoke from the nearby fire went straight up into the still air. Two of the children ran past the entrance laughing about something, their voices bright and sharp as struck flint in the cold air, and I heard one of them stumble and recover, the quick oof of it and then the laughter continuing without interruption, and I thought, this is also the job. This is what the 30 years was for. Not glory, not the title, the laughter not interrupted. Winona set the bowl down beside her, and she did not immediately look away from me. And I understood, sitting there in the cold morning with my dignity whole and a woman's eyes on me that saw all of what I was and had chosen to stay anyway. I understood something I had not known I was missing, which is that strength is not the same as isolation, and that the man who lets a good woman tend his wound is not less than the man who doesn't. He is, in some way I had taken 50 years to arrive at, more. She did not say anything else. Neither did I. The morning opened around us like something that had been waiting a long time to be allowed to begin.